Hello and welcome everybody. I'm Hannah Devlin, I'm the science editor at The Times, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here for the RSA's very special lunchtime lecture. Just before we begin, there's a little bit of housekeeping. We're filming today, so welcome to everyone on the live stream as well. Could everyone make sure their phones are on silent so that that isn't interrupted? If you want to get involved in the discussion online, the hashtag is RSA Marshmallow. And one further note is that we'll be showing a little bit of video during the talk, which we can't broadcast outside of this room, so please don't film it or take pictures and tweet them just for that little bit. Right, so now housekeeping's over. I'm very, very pleased to announce today's distinguished speaker, Walter Mischel. Professor Mischel holds a professorship in psychology at Columbia University. He's one of the world's most influential psychologists. He's recipient of countless awards. He's author of more than 200 scientific papers. And as you will all probably know, or hope will know, he's the inventor of the original experiment in the 1960s, the marshmallow experiment. And as you can see, we're running our own small version of this experiment today. So those of you who still have your marshmallow by the end will be able to trade it in for two outside at the back. And I'm not sure how strict the RSA is going to be about enforcing that, but they ought to be if they want to try and stimulate our self-control. So today, Professor Mischel is going to tell us a little bit about his classic experiment, but more importantly, what he's found since then about what influences our self-control and the genetics of it and how we can improve our self-control, perhaps most importantly. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Mischel.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me well? No problems? I'm delighted to be here. It's a pleasure to be here. One of the questions I'm often asked in venues like this is, why did I write the marshmallow test, Understanding and Mastering Self-Control at this point? And the answer is that I think an enormous amount has been learned about the ways in which we all can have much greater freedom, much greater choice than has been previously believed. And that what has been discovered about the plasticity and malleability of the human brain has enormous implications for how we think about human nature, how we think about ourselves and our children, how we educate them, and how we deal with the various challenges that have faced us since Adam and Eve lost paradise, and before that, in the voyages of Ulysses and so on. So the problem of self-control, self-discipline, self-restraint, as well as the challenge of how to do this in a way that still allows us to have the pleasures and the passions of life, because the two in no way contradict each other, is really what the research that I've been involved with for a very long time has been about. I want to give you as concrete a sense of what the so-called marshmallow test is. It didn't develop as a test, and it was initially motivated because I was trying very hard to understand something that I had trouble making sense of, really grasping, which is what was happening to my three very closely spaced daughters who were age 3, 4, and 5 in the early 1960s when I was a young professor at Stanford University. And I saw these three young ladies go through a tremendous transformation that all of us who have had children see in our children, which is how they change from being these hugely impulsive and quite uncontrolled, adorable, and also complicated and difficult challenges and joys in the early years to becoming the amazing people that they begin to be when they're 4 and 5 and 6 and are actually self-instructing themselves, and we can have real conversations with them. and they're able to control themselves and to wait, if we're lucky. And I realized I didn't have a clue about what enabled this, what made it possible, what was going on in their heads and in their behavior that allowed this transformation to occur. And of course, in America particularly, this was the height of behaviorism. So in the 1960s, to be talking or thinking about what goes on in the mind, not to mention the brain, was considered a non-scientific subject. So the challenge was to find a method that would allow one to study this systematically and begin to be able to do experiments on what makes it difficult or what makes it easy for children to delay gratification and to take future consequences into account. The situation that we developed was one in which the very first thing we did was to build a trust relationship with the child so that the child clearly understood that the promise maker would keep his promises. What I would like to do is show you briefly a video that was taken not at the time the experiments began, but about 20 years later by a postdoc of mine working in a South American country. And the kids that you'll see are 4, 5, mostly 5 and 6-year-olds who are, in this particular study, have already made a choice that they would like to have 2 Oreo cookies later rather than 1 Oreo cookie now. So they've made the choice, and they're sitting with a tray in front of them. On the top of the tray, on one side, are the 2 Oreo cookies they'll get if they wait for the lady to come back by herself. On the other side, on the left side, is the 1 Oreo cookie they can have right away. All they have to do is start eating it, or ring the bell that's there too, and bring the lady back, and then they get the 2, and it's over. And the kids clearly understand this. They clearly are in control of it because the goodies are really already there. So it's a very simple situation in which the measure is how long do they wait. So if we could have the video for this. to not reveal the identity of the child who did it, because of the hundreds and hundreds of children that we put through this situation, there was only one who went for all three. But, but you know, he went for all three in an enormously interesting, to me, way. And what he did was he opened one Oreo cookie at a time and rapidly licked out the inside. Then he replaced the two cookies on top of each other and went to work on the next one. And then he did the third one, and he did this with amazing speed and with terrific accuracy, replaced each exactly in the position from which he had taken it. And then, as this sequence ended, he sank his head innocently into his hand and looked out at the door like a method actor in total innocence. And what I found particularly interesting is that when I showed that video at a university lecture, the provost, the rector of the university, shouted out, "Give that guy a scholarship when he grows up," which I think raises profound questions about the morality of the administration. I would like now to discuss with you what these findings mean, how we can think about them, what the implications are for how we think about human nature, self-control, and so on. So would you be kind enough to join me?
Thanks very much. I found those videos absolutely hilarious. It definitely brought to mind a few children that I know. So one thing I was interested in, when you first published some of your results showing the amazing way that just the results of these experiments could predict the trajectories of the children in life, a lot of people took from that the message that if you can predict something so young, it must be genetic, it must all be there already. And it'd be interesting just to hear what you make of that and what you've learned since then.
I think that there clearly are major differences that we all see in our children beginning very, very early in life, in their temperament, in how easy they are to calm, in how easy they are to live with, in how much they torture us or let us get on with our lives. There's no question that there are major individual differences in the ease with which children can do the kind of thing that we saw on the videos. But the experiments, not only that I've done, but that have been done by many other people on a quality that you saw in those videos, which is called executive control or executive function. What's executive control or executive function? It means that you are able to have a goal in mind. I'm waiting for the two cookies. I'm waiting for the two marshmallows. You're able to inhibit interfering responses. I mustn't ring the bell. I mustn't think how yummy and chewy and sweet the marshmallow would be or how good the cream filling would taste. Otherwise, you ring the bell or you eat it. And you have to be able to use your cool brain, that is your prefrontal cortex, and the attention control areas in that to do exactly what those kids were illustrating, which is to transform the effortful, difficult situation of sitting alone in a barren, boring room and enduring a delay of 15 minutes or 20 minutes in this particular case, which is certainly almost unbearable to watch unless children are doing what they're doing. The ones who ring the bell are the ones who aren't doing that. They're the ones who are staring at it and are unable or just simply don't have the skills to transform the situation and do what you saw the successful kids doing here. So what we're seeing is the manifestation of executive function in an early form. And executive function is an absolutely critical cognitive skill. So some people find it much easier to acquire. Some people find it much harder to acquire. And it also depends for what. That is, you may be very good at waiting for marshmallows, but have other areas in which there are hot spots in which it is not at all easy. So the notion that willpower is a generalized trait that you either have or don't, and that you have in some amount, is, I think, completely contradicted by the kinds of findings that the research that I and others have been doing. Which means, in terms of the question you're raising, Hannah, that yes, our DNA matters profoundly, but to even think about the question of heredity and environment in the way that it has been traditional to do, which is it nature or is it nurture? Is it all genetic? Or is really to not be aware of what the developments have been in genetic work in the last 20 or so years. In the field that's now called epigenetic, it's become very clear that the genes that we have in the genome have to get activated or deactivated by what used to be thought of as the junk in the genome, which is actually the switches that turn on or turn off the genes. And those switches are influenced enormously, not only biologically by what we eat and what we smoke and what we drink. They are also influenced by what we think and what we feel and how we deal with stress and the nature of the toxic stresses that we experience and how we interpret them and so on. So there is a continuous interaction between our biology and our psychology, which has, to me, become one of the most exciting things in recent science, because it means that we are actually able to be agentic, to have a role in influencing how our genome plays out. I mean, there are constraints on it, of course. There are all kinds of conditions in which we are unable to control. But when it comes to this kind of self-regulation of emotions and the self-control of temptations and so on, we really are in a position to influence how our lives play out and what we make of our lives.
Yeah, so basically it's not, we're not born with a set amount of willpower. It's something that as we get better at it, we're probably getting more rewards. And
exactly. It's something that's acquired, that's learned, that's easier for some than for others, and it is influenceable. I mean, to me, one of the most exciting things that comes out of the research of people that I've collaborated with, not my own work, is the recognition of the really remarkable plasticity and malleability of the prefrontal cortex. Now, this is not something that is just there and there's nothing you can do about it. This is something that is open to change, and even in adults of an age, methods like mindful meditation.
So the prefrontal cortex, that's the bit that's making the decisions about whether to take the marshmallow or not.
Yeah. The prefrontal cortex is the part that takes the future into account. The part that is able to say, well, if I ring the bell, then I don't get the two that I want.
Yeah.
And what I refer to as the hot system, and all of this is discussed and described in great detail in the book, The Marshmallow Test. It begins with these experiments. It goes on to a really much, much larger story about how mind and brain act together to allow us to create the narratives that become our lives.
The thing I love about that video is that, as you said, that you see the kids that succeed are the ones that find something to keep themselves going whilst they're waiting. And I think that is quite different from the way we think about self-control normally. We normally think about willpower as what you saw in the ones that failed, who were just sort of staring at the thing thinking, don't press the bell, don't press the bell.
Grim determination.
Yeah, and do you think we've lost that a bit from the way we, as adults, try to deal with self-control and willpower? Because a lot of the, dieting programs and things are all very much just about denying yourself things rather than thinking around the problem and being imaginative about the way you get to your goal.
I mean, what we saw in the videos really were exercises in creativity, not in self-denial.
Yeah. Can you give an example? I mean, how might you do that as an adult with, something that you're really determined to do, or something that you're trying to say, control yourself with food or smoking?
Okay, I mean, let me give a concrete example about one of my hotspots, which is chocolate mousse. And I very often have had the experience of entering a restaurant with a resolution, like a New Year's resolution, no dessert or no chocolate mousse tonight. And what invariably happens if I go in just with that general good intention is that when the dessert tray arrives and is brought near the nose, it winds up, the mousse is in my mouth before any decision-making apparatus from the prefrontal lobe is activated. Now, this is something that in one way or another, I mean, your problem may not be with mousse, maybe, we all have our own marshmallows and we all have our own hotspots. One of the really simple but amazingly powerful strategies that's been developed for essentially cooling down the hot system and activating the cool system when you need it, as in the mousse battle, is by having what's called an if-then implementation plan, which is very specific. An example of an if-then implementation plan that works for me, for example, is if the waiter comes with the dessert tray and the chocolate mousse, then I order the fruit salad. So you have an if, the thing arrives, the hot stimulus arrives, then I have an alternative response to make. Now, to turn that from an intention into an effective if-then implementation plan means you have to practice it, because once you practice it, it becomes automatic and it's in the hot system. It becomes reflexive. It becomes like brushing your teeth before you go to bed at night. It's not a struggle. It's become an automatic habit. So it's really become a part of you. And in the same way, so this is simply one very simple way. Now, it sounds almost, silly, but it's amazingly powerful. It's been demonstrated to help people control weight by overcoming snacking habits. It's been shown to be very helpful in helping ADHD kids manage without medication to learn math. It's effective when adolescent kids are struggling with homework and so on, to have an if-then plan, for example, of the form, if I have an assignment due and I'm working on it, then I turn off my text messages. So very, very simple ways of hooking up the behavior that you want to the other can reduce the complexity of it. I think that one of the ones that I think is particularly important is, so far we've been talking entirely about temptations that are outside one. But what about the temptations that are inside one, like emotions that we have that we really are not very happy to have? For example, becoming easily angry when feeling a little unhappy with one's partner, which is not an uncommon situation for people who are in relationships. And this is particularly difficult for people who have a disposition that's, in the psychological literature, it's called rejection sensitivity, but it's somebody everybody has to some degree. That is the sense of feeling excluded and rejected and then becoming quite upset about it because, for very good reasons, nobody wants to be rejected and feel excluded. The problem is that people who have intense anxiety about rejection tend to behave easily in ways that assure that they'll get rejected, so that they have a self-fulfilling prophecy. They worry so much about being loved that they behave in very unloving ways. For example, there's one character that I talk about in the book who in the morning expected his partner to be smiling at him and so on, rather than reading the newspaper headlines, and would become very upset when she would do that. So we developed a very simple if-then plan for him, which is if I'm starting to become angry, then I take a deep breath, inhale, exhale very slowly, and count backwards from 10. By the time he is at 5, the cool system has cooled down, and he's realizing that if I throw the eggs at her, this will not get her to love me more. So one can instead say something like, would you mind passing the science section? So the point of these really simple examples is that we are able to have, through relatively simple strategies, ways of cooling even our dispositions. For example, in research that we've done with highly aggressive kids, they're already in trouble. They're 7 to 17, but they're already in a special place for a 6-week summer residential program because they're at high risk for acting out, for externalizing, for aggressive behavior, and for depression withdrawal. Well, the first thing we learned in that study is that kids aren't just, aggressive. They're aggressive if certain things happen. And that every disposition, including aggression, has a kind of personality signature. Aggressive if peers treat him in a certain way, but not if adults do. And the opposite pattern, aggressive if adults do this, but not. So the first thing with regard to the analysis of any particular sensitivity, whether it's a proneness to aggression, or whether it's an oversensitivity to rejection, even when it comes to feelings of depression, is to contextualize it. That is, to identify where are the hot spots. Where is it that you need to have the if-then plans or the distancing strategies? So this is so often overlooked in diagnosis because one is treating the individual as if that's an aggressive child. But the key to understanding what it's all about really is to know when yes and when no. When is he aggressive and when isn't he? Which also allows you to have a handle on what's the aggression all about.
Yeah. I could carry on for ages asking questions, but I'm sure everyone else has got plenty too. So open it up for questions. But I'll maybe take 2 or 3 at a time, and then we'll sort of answer them all in one go. The gentleman here.
Can you tell us how is it that children learn strategies? Because in the film, one kid turned away, one had an imaginary conversation, and presumably no one had said to them, here's a what-if strategy to cope. I mean, how is it that they learn these strategies, and why do some kids learn them much better than others?
Yeah, I think some people are better learners of strategies than others. I mean, I'm not suggesting for a moment that there aren't major individual differences in how easily these strategies are learned and become part of life. And some children don't need any help with it at all. That is, they're picking it up. All children develop an intuitive understanding also of what the rules are that make it possible to delay gratification more. For example, if we ask 4-year-olds, will it be easier to wait for this if you can see it or if we put a cover over it? And they know that it's there even when it's covered. They have object constancy. The 4-year-old may say, it'll be much easier for me if you leave it uncovered. And then you leave it uncovered and he rings the bell in 2 seconds. That is, they've got the rule absolutely wrong. By the time they're 5, most children know it's better if it's covered. So, but the relationship between knowledge and action is, again, very complicated. In one study, for example, we asked, you can have this little chocolate now, or that, we asked, if you can have a little chocolate now or a bigger one later, okay, what would an intelligent child do? And the child says, an intelligent child would wait. And then you ask the child, and what would you do? Do you want this one? I'll take it now. So the point I'm making is that the relationship between understanding and knowledge and action is far from close. And the point simply being, yes, there are natural differences now. Easily it's acquired, but kids can be taught the skills. For example, in one experiment, we varied what the child saw. They could either see the marshmallows, or they could see a picture of the marshmallows. We found that seeing the marshmallows made the bell ringing go very, very fast. Seeing a picture of the marshmallows actually helped them to wait much longer. So the question became, why does a pictorial representation, why does an image of the object of desire help you wait for it, and the real thing doesn't. So what we did in these experiments is we varied both what the child is looking at and what the child is cued before we leave the room to think. We said, you know what a picture is? Yeah, a picture is something with a frame around it. If you want to, when you want to, while you're waiting, you can make believe it isn't really real. It's just a picture. Put a frame around it in your head. The same child that would ring the bell within 30 seconds when it's for real, when he's imagining that it's a picture, even if he's looking at the real thing, can wait a huge amount of time. So what we learned from that, from experiments of that kind, is that it's about how you represent the object of desire. If you focus on its abstract features and think about it as in a cool way, it does not have the same impact on you as the other way.
How many people have eaten their marshmallows? Gone halfway through, quite a lot of you still got them. Okay. We'll maybe take two questions this time. This lady over here, and maybe if we take the man in the row in front as well.
Thank you very much. You started off by being optimistic and talking about neuro or brain plasticity. I'm really interested in what happens before the children get into your experiments and thinking about early years and the growing evidence that for each year in the first 4 years of life that a child lives below the poverty line, their executive function is undermined. How optimistic are you looking at the early years intervention programs, of which there have been quite a few in the States and a few in this country? How optimistic are you that those actually are effective in having enduring effects in raising executive function in those children born in poverty?
Okay, and the gentleman in front.
My name's Dwayne Barricar. I'm a corporate social responsibility consultant. I ate my marshmallow because I only wanted one, not to eat two. I want to ask you about behavioural economics and in particular any comment you might have on how this changes as an adult, the idea of self-control, and one experiment in particular in California, as I understand, people who installed solar cells on their roofs were given the choice of either a $1,000 American dollar cash incentive or a $2,000 tax credit, and almost everyone took the $1,000 cash incentive. And I guess that goes to what you were saying about the provost comment and how society rewards or doesn't reward what it sees as entrepreneurship.
Well, there are two important questions here.
Yeah, how society rewards
Okay,
entrepreneurship.
on the one about are there effective programs for helping kids who are living under chronic toxic stress, extreme poverty, unreliable environments, not necessarily consistent promise keepers, and so on. I think there have been exciting demonstrations published in the journal Science, particularly by a psychologist by the name of Adele Diamond, who works at the University of British Columbia, on a program that she calls Tools of the Mind. The tools of the mind are essentially different ways of teaching very young kids executive function, teaching them the strategies and so on that enable them to self-instruct, to do what we saw the kids in the film doing who were effective. Her program has clearly, working with highly impoverished kids coming from extremely difficult households, had dramatic effects sufficient to have schools stop the experiment after 1 year because they didn't want the control group in which the program was the standard curriculum to not have the benefits of it. So I think the critical thing is what kind of program. And my message is optimistic if the programs that are used in interventions are based really on what the scientific findings are, not what the latest fad is. Now, going to the question that you raised about why $1,000 now rather than a benefit, one of the things that is really very important to understand is that we are programmed in a certain way to discount severely delayed consequences and to overvalue immediate consequences. What's in the here and now takes over, which again, from the standpoint of evolution was a very good thing, because you have to deal with the here and now in order to even have a future. So the critical thing is to heat up the delayed value if one wants people to delay for something. And the way you heat up the delayed value is by making it more vivid and immediate. I'll give you an example that comes from one of my own efforts to control what I thought I would never be able to control, which is a huge smoking habit that I had 50 years ago, literally, when I was in my early 30s, in which I was smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day, supplemented by a pipe, just at the time that the information was coming out about the dangers of tobacco use, which I totally ignored. That is, my whole system paid no attention whatsoever. I went right on smoking, ignored that information at the same time that I was beginning the marshmallow studies. I thought really that this is something at the pipe and all that really helped me be an academic, parade up and down on the platform. You know, at the time I was wearing patches on my tweed jackets and so on. So I thought it was all fine, and my psychological immune system was making me feel, you know, this is perfectly all right, all my colleagues do it. Until one day I was in the shower and realized I had my lit pipe in my mouth. So that kind of changed my sense of how much control I really had over this, and still it made no difference. I mean, I went still right on, until something happened, which is I wandered around in the halls of the Stanford University Medical School, and I saw a man with his head shaved, with his chest exposed, and shaved, and with little green X marks all over his head and all over his chest. And I asked the nurse, "What's this?" And she said, "This is somebody who's being wheeled to radiation. Those are X marks are where the radiation goes. He's got metastasized lung cancer." That image took hold. So it is when you have a hot representation of a negative delayed consequence, or a hot representation, for example, of oneself really in poverty in old age, you know, and it's made hot. It's made, for example, your own face now as a young person morphed into what you will look like if you make it another 40 years. And then imagining that, you know, without sufficient funds so there are endless ways to heat up the delayed consequences and to cool the immediate consequences. And if one wants to overcome temporal discounting, which is a major economic phenomenon, as you know, the very effective way to do that is to cool the immediate and to heat the delayed. And there are various tactics for doing that. The self-instructions and so on that you saw the kids using are, again, sort of like early versions of what needs doing. Have I answered?
Yeah, maybe take some from this side. Perhaps well, I'll take this lady and this man both on the front.
The experiment that I did with my son, I didn't realize was an experiment, but he was going to have a Smartie after his lunch, aged 4, and he knew that. And I asked him to pick up his toys and said he could have another Smartie. And he said, "Do I still get the one after lunch?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Then I'm not picking up my toys." So I was just reminded when the man said, you know, 1 is enough. My son obviously felt 1 Smartie was fine. And just on the, well, 2 things. One was that I had a teacher at school, a history teacher, who said, if the next chapter looks more interesting than the one I've given you to read the next chapter first, then you'll be able to concentrate on the one I've given you, because otherwise your mind will always be thinking of the next one being interesting. But it's really your chocolate mousse that I wanted to ask about that. My daughter makes an excellent chocolate mousse, so, you know. But it's a question of...
I'm already interested.
You're exactly. Unfortunately, she's not in England, so, you know, you're safe. But it was really a question of why would you not allow yourself the chocolate mousse? I could see if you said to me, I'm obese and 1 more chocolate mousse is actually going to, you know, kill me.
No, I see your point.
But what you said was you would have the fruit salad instead, and the fruit salad probably has as much sugar in it because it's got this nice juice that they've made with sugar.
All right, so what,
So,
get to the question?
well, yeah, I'd just like to know why it has to be this instead of that, and not, I'm not going to have the pudding because I've had the main course and that is enough for me. And so the willpower thing has to be stop now.
Okay, and can we take a question from this, just pass it over to this man as well. Try and
Hi.
keep the questions fairly brief.
Just interestingly, I am a CSR consultant, and I did eat the marshmallow because I didn't want the second one. But my question is, on a kind of big scale, actually, is that I'm interested in how we respond to the issue around something like climate change. And obviously, there's a lot of delayed gratification need to be able to deal with that. And there's a lot of stuff that you can get right now, which is an issue. So I'm really interested in how that goes on to that bigger picture.
So you're talking about how society almost has a problem
Yeah,
with
society, but it's also down to individuals, because individuals are making those decisions. It's a conglomeration of individuals who are making those decisions on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis to not deal with climate change.
Okay, so how society deals with climate change?
I'd like to respond briefly to both
salad,
of these questions, which is, I think the point that I take from your question is that it's very important to realize that a life without ringing the bell and having the marshmallow or having the chocolate mousse would be as sad as one in which you don't have self-controllability at all. There is nothing in anything that I would advocate that suggests that we should not enjoy our lives. The point of having self-control is in order to live lives that are good lives, pleasurable lives, constructive lives, creative lives, not to have lives of self-denial. The extremes of self-control you see in anorexia nervosa, you see them in all kinds of ways that are essentially forms of obsessive-compulsive disorder. So nobody is talking, I certainly am not, about self-control as a way of life. Self-control is an essential skill to construct a life, but it's not a way of life. With regard to the points that you were raising about climate change and other concerns that are distal, I think, again, the same thing as in the cancer example. Ways of making what is distal really come alive in the moment. Gore, in some of the things that he tried to do, filming environmental change and so on, tried very hard in his efforts to make it very vivid. The problems of climate change are not problems that I have any particular knowledge about, so I really can't speak to them. But I think it's an excellent example of how we refuse to deal with delayed consequences, of which a very good example is going on in the United States right now with the Ebola problem, where we don't want to think about what could happen if that kind of thing goes out of control. So we don't like thinking about it, and even the people who are centrally involved in dealing with it are not really ready to jump into action because they sort of can't believe it's really happening. So I'm just saying, again, the inability to realize that the distal becomes the immediate is what makes it so very hard to take future consequences into account.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Got a few more over here, maybe the lady, and then two along, there's a gentleman as well.
Would you mind standing up? It makes it a little easier.
Yeah, and can we just, in general, try and keep it fairly brief questions?
Early on in your discussion, you started to mention ways in which you could cool down the frontal cortex, and you just started to mention mindful meditation, and then you stopped. And I just wondered how that would help.
So how would mindful meditation help?
I was just going to ask you what you were going to say about mindful meditation.
Oh, should we take another one then, since they were both the same? Is there someone? Yeah, this chap at the back.
To what extent would it be true to say that, neurologically speaking, what you're really recommending is reconfiguring the reward system?
I think that reconfiguring the reward system is a perfectly reasonable way of thinking and talking about it, and a way in which, in fact, many economists, behavioral economists, think about it, which is reconfiguring the reward system in a way that we change the temporal discounting. It's profoundly important. On the mindful meditation, the only thing I can say about it is it's a literature that I've been reading, and it's very impressive, because mindful meditation offers, again, a way of sort of emptying things out and focusing in and doing mental activities that give one a much better sense of being able to regulate what one is thinking and feeling. And I think this empowering of the self with the recognition that we can really be agentic, that in the way in which we think, the way we deal with our own heads, gives us an enormous power. The phrase with which I end my book is the old Descartes phrase about "I think, therefore I am." If I had to summarize in a line what the research of the last 20 years in cognitive science and in brain science has been telling us, is that we can think differently, and because we can think differently, because we can change how we think, we can change who we are and what we become. And the change in the conception of human nature, not as something that you're born this way, but that you actually are creating and making your life, and that you're able to change how your life plays out by how you represent not only the temptations in your life, but the challenges and the opportunities in your life.
We've got another couple over this side. There's a lady here.
I've got a couple of questions regarding adolescence. One is that during adolescence, there's restructuring and going on in prefrontal cortex that affect function. And how does that, if self-regulation, is it a linear process? Does it get better? Or is there a dip around adolescence as a result of the restructuring that goes on? And the second question is, we also know that adolescents are very susceptible to peer influence. And so what would you say about if-then kind of practice?
Well, my understanding about adolescence is that where there's a dip in all kinds of things, there's an elevation in all kinds of things also. And that, in fact, adolescence is an enormous opportunity for, again, making major changes in what becomes the life narrative. I think for many kids, it's around age 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, that there are these experiences that I think many of us have had, which is where there's a teacher or a person, someone that one meets or someone that one sees and learns about, even reads about, and suddenly says, I could be like that. I could become someone like that. And it seems to me that this is a tremendous time of opportunity for figuring out what the burning goals of what one's life are going to be, of what one wants to make of oneself. So I see adolescence both as a scary time because, yes, it's true that when a bunch of adolescents are in a car together, their chances of having a crash are much higher than if they're driving by themselves. So there are all kinds of potential influences always for the good and the bad, but I think adolescence is a time of real opportunity to figure out what's the life story going to become.
That thing about how self-control changes, do we get better and better as you get older on the marshmallow type test, or is there a dip, like, as in the question, when we get to that more impulsive phase,
I think
get worse?
I think on self-control, it's not a matter of getting better and better.
Yeah.
It's a matter of, are we able to manage the temptations that we're dealing with and manage the dispositions that we're struggling with in ways that let us get on with it. Yeah. And if so, there's no particular reason to keep getting better at it. I don't see this as something that you want to, become.
So is it more that we get new temptations in our lives around that time, maybe?
Certainly one of the things that the information technology revolution has done is it's given us so many buttons, so many apps to press, so many things that we can get that are temptations, in which we have absolutely no access to what the delayed consequences are. So I think the number of temptations keeps increasing as it's easier to buy and to connect. But I think it's also, to me, remarkable that my 4-year-old grandson, can do much better on the iPhone than I can. So I think kids are also developing tremendous executive functions without knowing it. And both the temptations and the competencies are going up.
Yeah. I think we had another one at the back here.
We found out more and more about how the brain does work. What do you think will be some of the changes and challenges faced by, for example, the criminal justice system and the education system?
Could we take the girl in front as well, and just because we've not got much time left?
Hi, I was just wondering, in all of the experiments that we've seen, the children are on their own. So I was just wondering if you tried putting 2 kids together, maybe a sibling, and see how their reactions change?
I think to respond to the last question first, I think the whole question of who one is interacting with at the time that self-control challenges come up is enormously interesting, enormously important, and reasonably understudied at this point. There's very little that's been done about it. There has been interesting work that already shows that if you give a child sort of a Superman cape to wear, they're much more able to delay gratification. So that very simple transformations of who I am, I'm Superman, I'm Batman, or whatever, and then you wait. So in other words, it is very much like what would the experimenter choose? What would an intelligent child choose? If you put on the robe of an intelligent child, you behave more in an intelligent way. So I think the question of the social connections that either undo self-regulation or that enhance it are very worth studying. On the point that you raise about the implications of what we're learning about the brain for public policy, whether it's with regard to the prison system and what Alan Alda refers to as brains on trial and so on, I think the implications are enormous. Unfortunately, we can't deal with them in a quick question and answer. But the implications for how we educate our children, for how we educate ourselves, for how we try to re-educate people who have committed criminal acts are enormous.
Okay, I think we've probably got time for 2 more quick ones from this side, and then we'll have to wrap up.
Thank you. I was thinking more about human resource planning or deployment in practical terms. If you were to look for a politician, or if you were even to look for an investment banker, how could some of these tests better understand what their likely predicted behavior is going to be, and or what kind of corporate training programs you might want to actually implement to try to dull down the kind of responses you think you're going to get to the challenges they face, whether it's manipulating LIBOR or sexting or whatever it is that they may end up doing.
So instead of Myers-Briggs, should we just be giving people a marshmallow challenge? And we'll take one more quick one from the lady here.
Did you find that there was a correlation between children from different demographic backgrounds? For example, very poor working class parents as opposed to well-behaved, educated, intellectual parents? Would the way that they brought up their children be significant in the responses you got?
Are you asking if there are differences, for example, in the self-control behavior we saw when we were studying children in some of the poorest neighborhoods of the South Bronx and when we were studying children at Stanford University?
Yeah, I think it was socioeconomic status.
The socioeconomic. I think what is crucially important is to recognize, first of all, that depending on what measure you're using, there are differences in the reward values that are connected to socioeconomic status. So depending on the kind of study that you're doing, what is a trivial thing for someone who comes from a wealthier background can be an important thing for someone who is a young child under heavy conditions of poverty. There's no question that people who are living, I think of it not so much as socioeconomic differences as the stress level under which they're living. It's entirely possible for people to be poor and yet living perfectly interesting and wonderful lives in poverty. Mm-hmm. It's when they're living under chronic stress, toxic stress, what's now called the biology of disadvantage, that terrible problems occur because they're not developing trust expectations, and for good reason. They shouldn't be trusting. They're living in an untrustworthy world. It's dangerous even when they're walking to school. They're not exposed to books. They don't know the difference between the front of a book and the back of a book. So under conditions like that, of course you would expect real problems in the development of the cool system and of executive function. Mm-hmm. So it's a poisonous, if one lives in a poisonous environment, the potential is fundamentally crushed.
I mean, just very quickly, the last question, could we be screening our politicians and heads of our banks before putting them in post with tests like this?
I think I think they'll wiggle out of it one way or another. I do want to make very clear that the same governor who may be terrific at balancing the state budget may have different kinds of issues with his attractive assistants. So the contextualization that I was talking about earlier about where the hotspots are. I mean, ex-President Clinton is a very good example of someone who Rhodes Scholarship, Yale Law degree, President of the United States. He's got every self-control skill in the world. I mean, he's one of the great manipulators of situations and of people and of just about everything. Could he change? Yes, I mean, he had a bad heart attack. He got in big trouble. He's very slim now. I assume he eats less junk food. I don't know what his behavior is with White House interns, but...
Well, I think on that note, we've run out of time. The Marshmallow Test, the book, is on sale outside. I'm sure Walter will be really happy to sign it for you. Yeah, just join me in again thanking Walter for a really interesting session. So.